Okay, our next committee of the day is the Public Service Committee. Those committee members are Mosley, Kamer, Holland, Lombardo, and McKittrick. We do have all committee members present whenever you're ready, Madam Chair.
If we could call public service to order, if I could get a motion for the previous meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Got a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
We have quite a few pieces before us. Ordinance authorizing Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts after publicly advertising for bids for the construction of Case Avenue parking lot and declaring an emergency. Mr. Lettle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of committee. Yes, at the corner of Case Market and River, there is a parking lot, a gravel lot that when we did the CSO project down there, we worked with the battered women's shelter and we did trade some land, and part of that agreement was we were going to build them a secured parking lot on that corner. So this was in the capital budget. These improvements will be new pavement, green infrastructure. There will be a security fence, crash-rated timber guardrail, lighting, landscaping. There will be a pedestrian bridge from the lot over to their campus or to the other side of the canal. So it'll be 38 spots. It will be ADA compliant, and then we will have lights on there too. So with that, I'll take any questions.
I have a question. So what part of the street are we talking about?
Well, if you remember where that not so nice adult bookstore was, it's that lot right there. So
Where the actual CSO project is at?
oh, it was the 5-7 rack separation down there. There was a rack down there, so we built that instead of building a big basin down there. That was part of our Second Amendment, where we changed it to conveyance, and then we built that huge storm retention area, which would be just south of this parking lot across River Street. So right by Fire Station 2, that big area that we have for storm retention, this is right across the street of River Street. You know how we closed River Street when we did that project and we built Fire Station 2? Yeah.
My nephew's.
I know, I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
I'm probably going to abstain from the legislation. Any questions from committee members?
Consent's fine.
All right, can I get a motion for consent?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Sarah, can we do a roll call?
Mosley,
Abstain?
Kamer,
Aye.
Holland,
Aye.
Lombardo,
Aye.
McKittrick.
Aye.
The motion passes 4-0 with 1 abstention.
Second piece of legislation is an ordinance approving the report of the Assessment Equalization Board selected pursuant to Section 53.03 of the Code of Ordinances of the City and Resolution Number 65, 2022, to hear and determine all objections to the special assessments for the improvement of certain streets between certain termini in accordance with Resolution Number 65-2022 Phase 1 Unimproved Streets Resurfacing Program and declaring an emergency. Mr. Leto.
Yes, Madam Chair. This is to approve the report of the Assessment Equalization Board to give the notice to proceed of the improvements of the 2022 Resurfacing Unimproved Street Program. And actually, the next 3 pieces are all basically the same. I'll give the same explanation. with the timing of the holiday next week, if I could ask to suspend the rules so we can give the contractor, they're out there doing the carryover, but this way they can merge the two programs together, make it more efficient for them. So if we could suspend the rules, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from committee members? Any questions from council? Okay, can I get a motion for suspension of rules?
Motion for suspension of the rules.
Second.
Motion is second, all in favor?
Aye.
Next piece, ordinance approving the report of the Assessment Equalization Board selected pursuant to Section 5303 of the Code and Ordinance and of the City, and Resolution Number 64-2022, to hear and determine all objections to the special assessments for the improvement of certain streets between certain termini in accordance with Resolution Number 64-2022, Phase 1, Residential Resurfacing Program, determined to proceed with improvements and declaring an emergency. Mr. Leto.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. This is to approve the report of the Assessment and Equalization Board and to proceed with the improvements of the 2022 resurfacing program of residential streets.
Okay. Any questions from committee members? Council? Can I get a motion for suspension of the rules?
Motion for suspension of the rules.
Second.
And a motion is second. All in favor?
Aye.
Next piece, ordinance determining to proceed with the improvement of certain streets between the certain termini in accordance with Resolution Number 66-2022, 2022 Phase 1, Partial Depth Pavement Replacement Program, and declaring an emergency. Mr. Leto.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This is to approve the report of the Assessment and Equalization Board, the notice to proceed for the improvements of the partial depth 2022 resurfacing program.
Okay. Any questions from committee members? Mr. Kramer, you got a question? No? Okay. Council? That's okay. I got that's what I got. Can I get a, is this consent or suspension?
Can you suspend the rules on these two?
Can I get a motion for suspension of the rules?
I move for suspension of the rules.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Sarah, we're on number 10, right? Okay.
Correct.
Ordinance determining to proceed with the improvements of certain streets between certain termini in accordance with Resolution Numbers 63-2022, 2022 Phase 1, Arterial Collector Resurfacing Program, declaring an emergency. Mr. Leto.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. This is to approve the report of the Assessment and Equalization Board, notice to proceed with the improvements of the 2022 resurfacing program. This is the arterial collector portion of our resurfacing program.
Any questions from committee members? Council? Can I get a motion for suspension of rules?
Motion for suspension of the rules.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Number 11, ordinance authorizing Director of Public Service to enter into a contract or contracts utilizing field turfs, source wells, competitively solicited cooperative contract for the construction of field turf at Firestone Stadium and declaring an emergency. Mr. Leto.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of committee. This is a total replacement of both fields at Firestone Stadium. It will include removing all infield material, outfield grass, install new drainage, new stone base, new outfield fence to meet the safety requirements set forth. New artificial turf is specific to the softball game. This will greatly reduce maintenance. Parks maintenance really feels like this will reduce maintenance by about $100,000 a year out there. We have had discussions with Ohio High School and the Mid-American Conference, which is the conference at Akron University in Kenton. They are going to sign a 5-year agreement with us. We've had a couple meetings out there with the councilman. He came out and we talked over the project with him. Also, with this, we will be able to play youth boys baseball, but it's mostly going to be girls. talking to APS, there is not one Akron Public School that has a softball field on their campus. They use our parks, but there's not one on the campus, and they lost over, this was a horrible year, as we all know, with the rain, so they lost over half their games due to inclement weather. With both these fields having turf and both have lights, we feel like it will be first priority in the spring for Akron Public Schools to play all their games there, and then we will reach out to other schools, or they will reach out to us, as we are already getting calls. So with that, I will take any questions.
Okay. Any questions from committee members? Ms. Holland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Lettle, do we have any information that compares the safety of artificial turf to a natural field?
Well, when artificial turf first came out, it was one turf for all. So this manufacturers, we've looked at numerous different fields, and the length of the turf and the composite that's in the turf, they feel like it is as close to natural grass as you can get, or the dirt infield. So there is going to be no dirt at all. It's going to be all turf. So it will really reduce the maintenance tremendously out there. Because as we know, the outfield could be fine, but when the dirt gets soaking wet, and unfortunately in the spring the temperatures are so cold, there's just nothing you can do to dry it out. I mean, you're kind of dependent on wind and sun, and unfortunately we don't get a lot of sun in this climate, or the temperature. So we've talked to a few colleges. We've gone, and they really feel like it's going to be well worth it.
Nice. Well, one thing that we know about equal access, equal opportunity for girls and women is that just the ability to consistently play makes all the difference. So thank you.
And practice, you know.
Indeed.
I mean, a lot of times, I think this year, one of the schools said their first game was the first time they got on the field. They didn't even get outside to practice, unfortunately.
Right. Mr. Kamer?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. Lettle, for all the conversation we've had with you and John Malish and some other folks from the city. I know you just mentioned basically an overview of the detailed scope of the project, but I did not hear anything that some of this funding would be spent on the stadium itself.
That's correct. In this legislation, we plan to renovate the bathrooms. They haven't had any really money put into them in years. And if this is going to be our showpiece, we want to upgrade the bathroom. So with that, this ongoing maintenance, we continue to do things at the stadium. And as the councilman pointed out to us at one of our meetings, we need to keep reinvesting. This is a show place. And if we're going to be bringing people in from not only the state of Ohio, but this conference, Division II girls, we need to really make this a showpiece. So we will continue the maintenance and keep this upgraded.
Thank you, I appreciate it. One additional comment. I know you mentioned we're going to save roughly $100,000 a year, and I know you just stated that we need to move forward with upkeep of the stadium, and I just encourage my colleagues here on council that this is a facility that just doesn't serve Ward 7, and I think we all get that. This is a facility that serves the whole state, and obviously some folks that come from other states, and I've actually had conversations with 2 residents that play ball, that live in different wards here in the city of Akron, and I would just encourage whatever we can do to make sure that place doesn't crumble in the future, because we do need to build and spend some money on the brick and mortar of that place. So I just want to go on record for saying that, and I'll do what I can to hopefully help and prepare for next year's budget. So thank you, and I would like my name added.
Absolutely. Mr. Mallett?
Thank you very much. Mr. Lettle, you actually answered my question in part because I was going to ask about the savings, right? It is obviously a significant expense of money, but $100,000 a year is also, we'll recoup that over the next decade. Do you know what the current maintenance costs are?
I do not, but I can get that for you. I think just the 100,000 a year was mostly just the field maintenance that we put into it, mowing contract, and you've probably seen we've taken over some of the mowing here with our own park staff, so we've aligned some of our staff, so I think you're going to see a noticeable improvement, not only in the stadium, but in our grass mowing in general.
Absolutely. That's something to look forward to.
Yes.
But I just also want to echo Councilman Kamer's points. You know, Firestone Stadium has been really a gem for not just Ward 7, but for really our city and our state with the OHSAA state tournament there, and also just an important place for women's softball and men's softball. So, you know, I think the investment's very important.
You're good, okay. Mr. Lombardo?
Thank you. Is the $1 million price tag for both fields?
Yes.
Okay.
And we're putting some money into the restrooms.
Right,
Yep.
okay. I was under the impression when I see all these high schools do their football field that this is good for life, but it really isn't good for life.
No, we're hoping to get 12 to 15 years out of the turf, but
Right.
when you go to replace the turf, it's not another $1 million.
Right.
All the drainage, all the stone, all that is done.
It's all there,
The
yeah.
fence is done, that type of thing.
Okay, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Any other questions from council members? If I get a motion for suspension of the rules?
So moved.
Second?
And a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Our last piece coming before us is an ordinance amending and supplementing Title IX, Chapter 95, littering, Section 95.99, penalty of the Akron codified ordinances in order to increase the criminal sanction for littering in the city of Akron, declaring an emergency. Mr. Lash, can you handle this?
Sure. Madam Chair, we're actually in discussions with public safety as to the enforcement mechanisms or options at this time, so I'm not sure exactly if you were looking to pass this today, but we're actually...
I could take time.
Okay, if you don't mind doing that, that'd be great.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Any questions from committee members? Mr. Little, you have something to add?
No, I will defer to you, Madam Chair. Any help we can get, though?
Yes, absolutely. After speaking with Jackie over at Keep Akron Beautiful, it's just because of what we've all been doing the last couple of weeks, and we have a big cleanup coming up on June 4th. Take a week for anyone who has any questions, but definitely would like to get it passed before then. We have a littering problem in our city. Literally just this past week, I watched someone in front of me throw their whole entire McDonald's wrappers, bag, everything out the window, and they just kept going. I know Mr. Kamer just had a cleanup this week. We have another big one coming up on June 4th with all the different wards. If you go to the Keep Akron Beautiful website, in 2019, they had over 204,000 pounds of litter and illegal dumping. And in 2019, they had 2,600 volunteers took time to help clean up the Akron parks and around the city, which totaled 17.84 tons of trash, 53 tires, from 108 sites, including 20 schools. I know they've been having a problem getting individuals from the court to show up. I think once we start reinforcing it the way it should be, they'll show up to help clean up the city of Akron. And this legislation is specific to the city of Akron. They will have to clean up in the city. They won't be able to pick and say, well, we want to go out to No Shade, to Chicago Falls, but they're going to help clean up in Akron. If you litter here, you're going to help clean it up. So we will take a week for any questions that anyone has. Councilwoman Holland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I just want to express kind of two concerns. First, I'd like the record to reflect that I am against litter. Litter is bad. And I think it's fair to say that after 2 years of pandemic pandemonium, that the litter situation is off the hook. But I just don't recall seeing the kind of litter situation that we're all seeing ever before. And I don't know that that means that we are even more of a throwaway culture than we've ever been before, or if it's reflective of something deeper. And I suppose we could have an entire separate meeting just on that philosophical exploration. But my concern here is a very practical one. We're talking about a mandatory minimum penalty, and that gives me pause. A mandatory minimum penalty of $500.
No, it's $250.
$250?
It's $250.
Okay.
There's an amended one, and it's $250.
Oh, okay. So it was reduced from the original
But
mandatory.
they can also do community service for that.
Okay. I guess I would be interested in knowing exactly what level of impact, if it's even measurable, our recent community cleanup days has had, and whether we are really, truly at a point where we need a mandatory minimum penalty criminal ordinance. I would be interested in knowing where we are with that. And the other concern I have is really capacity. At a time where I think it's extremely difficult to get the kind of, for instance, traffic enforcement. Daily, and I imagine I'm not alone in this, I have reports about speeding issues throughout Ward 1. And so I question whether this is something that we could meaningfully expect enforcement of. So I just have those two observations, and thank you for the time.
Absolutely. Mr. Kamer and Mr. Lombardo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to commend you for bringing this in. It's a conversation that I think we should have. Obviously, it's probably a work in progress, but I definitely support the initiative. And just because I had a cleanup over the weekend, it's not because this is new to me and first time I see litter, but I was a little shocked by the litter that we saw over the weekend in Ward 7. And I do think we need to have this conversation and see if the administration and us council and members of our public safety and Keep Akron Beautiful can come together and have a good piece here and educate folks on littering because it is a problem out there, especially when we have volunteers out there that are volunteering to put themselves in harm's way of driving motorists and stuff like that. Like we were over on Wilbeth Road over the weekend, and I'm just amazed by the amount of speeders that was flying by as we were picking up litter. So yeah, I do support this. I commend you, and hopefully we come out with a good piece. And it does need enforced, and we need the city to start enforcing these issues, including speeding. I know the chief is here, and I know my colleague mentioned maybe, I don't want to put words into her mouth, but I definitely will stand here and support fines for litter and speeding. So, and I will always have your back. So thank you, Councilwoman Mosley, and whatever I can do to help, let me know. Thanks.
Mr. Lombardo.
Thank you. First is a comment, and then it's a clarification. The comment is for anybody listening at home. The city of Akron allows 8 tires on your curb a year. So a lot of people may not know that, but and you don't even have to call 311. You just put the tires on the curb and they'll get picked up. The clarification is it 4 at a time or all 8? Can all 8 go?
You can.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know that you'd replace 8 tires at once, but yeah, you could.
Come to 1246 Vane Avenue and you're going to see 8 in a few weeks. But
our price keeps going up, just to let you know. I mean, I remember when it was $1 or $2 to dispose of a tire. Now it's over $4 for us to dispose of those tires, unfortunately.
And the tires, though, cannot have the rim. It's just the tire.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. If I could get sorry, Councilman Mallett.
Thank you. First of all, having seen Mr. Lombardo's really professional-looking garage, he may have more than 8 tires in there at a time. But I want to just lift up a couple of the points made by my colleagues, and thank you, Ms. Mosley, for bringing us this conversation. we really do have a significant problem with littering. Mr. Fusco and I were up on Tice Road a couple of weeks ago, and there's an awful lot of interesting stuff there, and stuff that's clearly been there for a long time, right? That's almost buried there. We found an empty, raw chicken container from Giant Eagle. I'm not sure how that ended up on the side of Tice Road, but I was walking on Hawkins a weekend ago. There's a speaker that's just sitting there. It's a big old speaker. But I guess I do share some of the concerns of Councilwoman Holland when it comes to enforcement and how that will work. So Councilwoman Mosley would like to talk with you about some of that. I think we clearly have issues when it comes to speeding, when it comes to litter, when it comes to the use of drugs. These are all things that we criminalize and penalize people for to try to deter use. And frankly, I'm not sure how effective we have been in deterring that use through fines and penalties. And I do have some concern with if we impose significant penalties, some people who are wealthy are able to just write a check. People who are not may have to go out and basically perform a significant amount of labor. And I think that regardless of what we do with this, I hope we acknowledge that we can solve issues with law, we can solve issues with culture, and we as a society have to find better ways of educating and increasing awareness about the fact that this is unacceptable. So I look forward to talking more about this.
Right. Councilman Fusco and then Mr. Leto.
Thank you. I'll be very brief. Just that had served on the board for Keep Akron Beautiful for a number of years, and I share my colleagues' disgust with our city in terms of the condition that it's in. Now, it's important to mention, though, that having conversations with Jackie from Keep Akron Beautiful, we're not alone in this. In that, and it's. We all use it, but it's true. The COVID is part of our problem in getting people to pick up the trash. We all know what happened with regards to that. And so that's part of the problem, and Akron isn't alone in that. Other cities throughout the United States is dealing with this as well. And so the conversation is definitely worth having, and I appreciate my colleagues stepping up and sponsoring these pickups. I think we've had more this year than I've ever really seen, so that's great. And obviously we're going to need to do more, but we may have to get creative in terms of how we're going to be able to eliminate this problem. But appreciate the conversation. Thanks.
Right. Mr. Leto.
Real quick, I just want to give a shout out to the I Promise School. We have a neighbor, she's a third grader, and her grandmother brought her up, a couple weeks ago and said, tell Mr. and Mrs. Little your story, what you learned today. And someone, and I don't know if it was Keep Akron Beautiful, was teaching the kids about littering and how bad it is. And she was adamant. She goes, Mr. Lowe, you know it's bad to litter? And I said, yeah, we don't do it. So I got to give them a shout out to educating the kids at that age that it is not the right thing to do. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Right. I do want to add to that. We did a cleanup with the students of Hoban, myself and Coach TK, and I was a little unnerved about where we were cleaning up at because we were right there at that Arlington Street, 5th Avenue ramp exit, which I do not recommend at all, especially when you have kids, and just to see the amount of trash that people are just throwing and disregarding. And I think this is more than just an educational piece, because these are adults doing it. And there is a mandatory community service aspect to this now. Instead of just saying, we're going to give you a fine, which of course, coming from the courthouse, you can still do community service for your fines. But now we're saying it's mandatory that you have to help clean up the litter that you caused. It's great that we can get 2,600 people who will show up and help us volunteer, but they're not the ones littering. So I think there needs to be a point made to, if this is what happens when you litter. So then maybe now they'll be educated on the effects of it, because just that little cleanup that we did there, and we went and did a couple of the CSO racks, in that little footprint, the amount of trash we picked up, it was unbelievable. And then even later in that day, I had my granddaughters with me, and I introduced them to Jackie, and they walked around with the little orange little clippy things, made little videos saying, "Keep Akron beautiful." And they just was knocking on the doors asking people, can they get the trash out of their yard? And if our kids can do it, an adult throwing garbage out of the window can do it. So we've got to figure it out, and that's why I want to take time. But like Mr. Kamer said, I just think it's something that has to be enforced. It has to be enforced because people aren't doing it. And even speaking with Jackie this week, she talks about, you know, people just do stuff and they don't want to show up for community service, and now it'll be mandatory and they have to show up, because she said that they're struggling with getting people to help because people just won't show up. So maybe now it has to be mandatory. Ms. Holland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think a couple of issues have emerged here that are really valuable. One of them is the importance of educating children and really lifting the collective vibration up that way. When we start early in encouraging our citizens to think about this whole city as our front yard, I think that changes things. And I also think that there's often a surprise experience hidden within a day of service, which is that it feels good. And when we are part of the solution, and I find this every time I do service work, and I see some twinkling eyes around the horseshoe right now. I think everyone experiences this. When we are of service, it changes us. And I think it's fair to say that we're a little less likely to roll down the car window and throw something out when we're part of the effort. I agree that litter is a bigger problem than I've ever seen it in all of my years of living in the city of Akron. I'm grateful for the conversation, and I'm also grateful that we're gonna look into some of the interesting aspects of this and work together to see what we can do with it. Thank you.
If we could get a motion for time. Oh, Sharon, I'm sorry.
Thank you. I just want to say, one of the things that I found, especially with working at the park so much, is I call it my 10-foot rule. You know, kids will carry, or young people a lot of times will carry trash 10, 15 feet, but they're not going to carry it much longer than that. And one of the things I think we need to look at too is we all know these big pedestrian streets where a lot of people walk. We really need to look at more trash cans that we can put on those streets. The big ones Metro have are weighted so they don't get knocked over, but they're only allowed to be at the bus stops. And I think on some of those main streets, especially where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, you can say we want the kids to throw trash away, but if there's nothing that they can see handy within 10 or 12 feet, they're not going to do it. And we need to really look at maybe ramping up our purchase of trash cans on those big pedestrian walkways.
Thank you. If I could get a motion for time.
So moved.
I need a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it. I'm seeing we have nothing else coming before us. We are adjourned. Thank you.
We can move right into the Public Safety Committee. Those committee members are Kamer, Mosley, Lombardo, Malik, and McKittrick. We do have all committee members present whenever you're ready, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you. I will move into calling the public safety meeting to order, please. Can I get approval of our minutes from May 16th, please?
So moved.
Second. I have a motion and a second. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? All right, thank you. We do not have no legislation in front of us today, but we do have a presentation from our Akron Police Chief, Milet. Actually, Councilwoman Mosley requested a few weeks ago that we invite him to come and speak about the police department and the extra jobs, security detail that they do at bars and other events. So, Chief, you folks can come up here if you want. If you want, you can sit in these two seats here. We just ask that you try to speak into the microphone the best you can for anybody that's viewing us online. And what we'll do is we'll have the chief speak, and then I'll take questions from committee members first, or comments, and then we'll go from the rest of council members. So thank you, Chief, I appreciate it. Is this your first time here in council chambers? No, sir. For public safety? For public safety. Yeah. Well, welcome, thank you. So I'll turn it over to you two, and the topic, we're going to try to stay on the topic, though. It's going to be just for, you know, extra jobs that Akron police officers have the opportunity to do. Thank you.
Absolutely. I've asked Sergeant Null to attend with me today since he has been with the police department a whole lot longer than I have.
Chief, I'm so sorry to interrupt. Your microphone is not on. Can you pull that switch? There we go.
Good?
Thank you.
Yes. So I've asked Sergeant Null to attend with me today because he's been here for a lot longer than I have, and hopefully between the two of us we'll be able to answer the questions that you might have. But Chairman, thank you so much for having us. Council, it's great to be with you this afternoon. Our off-duty policy that defines what an off-duty job is, first and foremost, is voluntary on the officer's part. In a nutshell, what will happen is we will get a request from a business or a person inside of Akron, a resident, business person, or wherever the request is coming from, saying they have a need for additional security presence at their event. At that point, we make sure that the request is within our policies. We explain what the officer's duties and roles will be, and then the person intaking the information will send the opportunity out through a wireless notification system. Officers sign up for, officers who want to work off-duty jobs. The off-duty job will go out, and then it's on a first-come, first-served basis. Something has happened over the last several decades, and maybe it's for a good thing for officers. When I came on, everybody was going after off-duty jobs because you couldn't work enough to supplement your income. Something over the last decade that I've seen as chief is less and less people are interested in working off-duty jobs for a multitude of reasons. But number one and biggest thing that I know is that they want their time off. They want to unplug, and they want to get away from work. They want to spend more time with the family, which is actually the smarter model than when I was coming up. The other thing that's happened is the risks to officers has changed as well. And it's just not the physical risks that go along with putting on the uniform, but it's also the liabilities that come along with the decisions that they make and such. And they're feeling that more than ever before. That, combined with the fact that we have staffing issues in the police department and that we have overtime available for officers, that is also an additional thing that is competing for officers to accept and go into an off-duty job scenario. So there's a lot of multiple things that are going on at the same time that is leading us not to be able to fill every request that comes into the police department for us to identify an officer to work an off-duty job. Steve, am I missing anything?
This working? Yes, thank you. No, you've not. You've explained it clearly for your short time here. Yeah, basically, the chief did touch on the main points. The one thing would be that the process would be that somebody would call the information desk, and that officer or that sergeant would then send out the mass text to everybody saying there's ABC company or person is looking for an off-duty officer at this location, and if it's taken, we're notified. If it's not, then it just goes unfilled. But basically, that's it. You covered it. There
are two standard rates of pay for the jobs that we work. One is a rate that has less risk. Every job has its own inherent risks, and right now with the upcoming adoption of the new contract, that will be $40 an hour. But then there's two types of jobs that really bring an extra elevated risk level that goes along with them. You'll talked about the traffic situation, speeding. All traffic-related jobs that our officers engage in is a higher level of risk to the officer. I can tell you that I have buried friends of mine that were killed in the line of duty or off-duty, directing traffic and doing a traffic function. The other type of job that has a elevated risk level that comes along with it are jobs at bars, at liquor establishments. And for those two types of jobs, we charge a rate of $50 an hour. And that's where our, current pay rate is right now. So, kind of gave you a nutshell what the off-duty job system looks like. I will be happy to answer any questions.
Oh, sure, thanks, Chief, I appreciate that. Well, Councilwoman Mosley, you have any, I don't want to, call you out, but you requested this, I might as well call on you first.
First, I want to thank you for coming. Just because we keep getting people coming down to council talking about their bars or purposely not being covered, just explaining the process, I think helps. I think most of us know the process, but I think it's important for those bar owners to understand the process, and people aren't just purposely not showing up to work their bars. And even when you tell them it's across the city, it's not that they're just not wanting to work the black club. No. This is going on across the city, and you spoke about the overtime. So if they're getting overtime, how much is overtime per hour?
It's time and a half. So what does that come out to, Steve? Plus money into the retirement system, into the pension system.
Well,
plus you're covered under workers' compensation, and the pluses keep on. Plus you're in a team environment where there's just more than one other person working an off-duty job with you, or you're there by yourself. Right. Plus you got all the resources inside the car. It's just, and even then, council member, we have a hard time filling overtime slots as well. So I was out last week, so it took me a little bit this morning to catch up on email, and I saw a presentation that was done a couple of weeks ago where a community member raised an issue with that person's specific club. And I did some research right before the council meeting. And I know of a handful of officers that had worked that club, and what they cited as reasons why they weren't going back was everything I just explained to you all, and the competing interests for overtime and all the benefits that go along with the overtime. So anyways, just to let you know.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman Lombardo? Sure. And then I'll go to Malik.
Thank you. Does off-duty mean undercover, or is that two different things?
No, so it is an officer that works in uniform, but is not employed at that moment by the city of Akron. So they're always city employees, but their salary is being paid by the person that they're working for at the off-duty job.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Malik?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Sergeant Null. Appreciate all the information, as always. A couple of questions. I guess one of them is when it comes to, there are just ordinarily safety considerations with regard to business districts, with regard to bars and restaurants. At some level, there's a safety responsibility on the owner of the establishment, and there's a broader safety obligation on the part of the city, just as in any neighborhood, right? How do you think through the balance of that, right? So, because some patrol, some work it's not like these places are devoid of officers in the area, right? Some work is already being done, paid for by the city. How do you think through that balance, particularly when you're looking at a business that may not be living up to its own obligations on its premises?
So thank you for that question, sir. And it really is a relationship. Each side, each group has their set of responsibilities. I think the city has to, provide the guidelines and the direction on how to operate a business within the city, and where we can support, we, certainly should support. I think it's in our best interest as a city to bring in new business, to encourage business, but the business owners also have a responsibility that they need to own up to. And, you know, I had heard comments in the past that, look, once I close my doors and it's outside, I don't have any responsibility anymore. I don't know the legal requirement in civil law in terms of that. I could tell you, you know, ethically, I think as a business owner, I still have a responsibility if things are going on inside my club or inside my establishment and I'm not reporting it and I'm pushing it out onto the street. Well, I'm just throwing my problem out to a different direction, and I can't just wash my hands of it. I won't speak on experiences here in Akron because I don't have many, and I have zero when it comes to working off-duty jobs. But I worked off-duty jobs the majority of my career, and many of the jobs that I worked were in the bars. And there were certain establishments that we couldn't work in because of criminal activity that would happen on the property itself that we knew of. And we had a policy that said you can't, and we didn't, and we couldn't work at those locations. But the bars that I did work in, and where the approach of the business owner is, hey, look, 2 o'clock, I close my door, that's not my problem anymore. I explained that it is your problem because this is a reflection on your business. And when we asked that drunk person, where are you coming from? And I'm coming from ABC Bar, and they were well past the legal limit. They got intoxicated, and the bar kept on serving them. And the bartenders knew that the person was intoxicated. Does that make sense? That they have a responsibility to police within the 4 walls of their business. And then if something happens inside, that they have a responsibility to dial 911 so we can go in there and de-escalate situations before they turn tragic.
Thank you.
Did you have a comment?
I do. To build off of the chief's argument, I have taken calls from pretty much everybody here. When a business falls below the standard that is expected of them to operate safely, appropriately, and within legal limits, we definitely have options, and we've pursued those on a lot of council members' behalf here. Whether it's we're objecting to a liquor permit being renewed, whether we're pursuing a nuisance action. I've had individuals in this horseshoe sit with me in prosecutors' hearings when we really try and we don't start at the end of the story. We don't start at, we're shutting you down, we're done. We counsel, we work with, we try and encourage everybody to get along and make the best choices and the safest choices in the neighborhood before it goes down to this level. So I appreciate what everybody does here along the way to make sure every establishment is as safe as possible, but when it goes past a certain threshold, we have to maintain order. We have to maintain the safety of the neighborhoods in this community, and at some point, we have to say enough. We object to that liquor permit. We object to this establishment continuing to operate and just turning neighborhoods upside down. So again, we will and have worked with anybody, but at some point we have to stop and say we just cannot condone this behavior any longer.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Councilwoman Howland?
If I could.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Councilwoman Mosley, for inviting the chief to be here today. And Chief, thanks for coming. It's good to see you, and also good to see Mr. Knoll. I have so many thoughts about this, and I appreciate everything that's been said, and I'd like to sort of piggyback on something that Ms. Wilms said. I feel that in Ward 1, there's been almost some urban folkloric misunderstanding by some businesses, which is that they don't necessarily understand that for a business owner to call the authorities in certain situations is not necessarily to be getting themselves in trouble. And I think this is a commonly misunderstood thing, that it is the case that you can find yourself tagged as a nuisance operation under certain circumstances, but asking for help as a business, contacting the authorities when circumstances rise to a certain level, that is not going to get you into trouble. Am I correct in that?
As far as I'm concerned, yes, but it depends on when you call. So if you have the big brawl inside your establishment and you've kicked everybody out and you're calling 2 hours later and saying, I had a big fight and now something bad has happened outside the establishment, I would think that that's something for us to consider on how genuine they are in trying to help us help them.
Fair enough, fair enough.
And Gert, please correct me if I'm wrong, if we have an establishment that dials 911 and says, I have an emergency on my property, we go and they're trying everything in their power to address the issues before they become issues, that's something that we would take into consideration.
Absolutely, and we've counseled businesses as such. When something is happening, please call us so we can assist with that. But absolutely, I've been present when those conversations have taken place with regards to APD encouraging immediate action on behalf of the bar owners.
Early action, preventive action being the wise move. And I guess along those lines, there's a long-running joke in West Hill Highland Square that we have 2 seasons, snow and noise. And so with that in mind, and I love my neighborhood, longtime resident, and I'll take some snow and I'll take some noise. It's part of the deal. I do anticipate that as the warm weather is arriving, and the windows are open, and you know, the bars are hopping and everything's happening, that we are simultaneously getting into vacation season for APD, that we're also going to be looking at promotions happening as the new academy produces its graduates, that we are going to be looking at our usual sort of competition for capacity and coverage. And can you speak to that a little bit?
Absolutely, yes, ma'am. And it is, it's a transitional season. And yes, all those things that you mentioned all contribute to higher call volume, and unfortunately at times slower response times by us because we have to prioritize. You know, we have staffing issues inside the police department we're trying to address. We have a recruitment campaign going on right now, and I'll do a shameless plug. We are hiring, and certainly we are looking for the most talented individuals that we can find. We're focusing on diversity of thought, diversity of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, and across the whole spectrum in order to get our numbers up to where they need to be for us to be able to provide the level of service that this community deserves and demands. With that in mind, we do have an academy class that will be graduating in the next several months. Those officers are not fully fledged officers yet. They will be on the field training officer program. And so, again, we have several months to go before we reach even close to being at adequate staffing. All of that, combined with, no doubt, we're going to have an increased call volume during the summer, will add to probably some frustrations in the community. But certainly, if it's not for a lack of trying on our end.
Thank you, Chief.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Councilman Malik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make one additional point. This past Saturday at Case CLC was the 10th anniversary of the Race for Case, a 5K race that they hold to support the community. And it's very well attended, successful event. It could have been cooler. It was 85 degrees for the runners, including myself. But one of the things that I wanted to make clear is that at every intersection throughout Castle Park, there were officers, right, off-duty officers, and they made that event possible. They make the marathon possible. They make so many other events throughout the year possible that really are some of our favorite days in Akron: Porch Rocker, Marathon, Pride. And so I think, you know, the work that officers sometimes do over and above is part of what makes the city great, should be recognized for that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Mosley.
Yes. Just briefly, so when someone calls in to request an officer for a club, do you all have like a call log, a sheet, like say, for instance, I don't know, Alley Cat Grill, just making up a name, they want an officer for a Friday evening. You guys post it, but is there like a system in place where some of our club owners will say, we call and no one ever calls us back, they won't give us officers? Well, then we can look at a call log and say, no, we see you called on Friday, we let you know that there were no officers available. Because to me, it seems like that's where they all seem to go, is saying that they call and there's never any response. no one gets back to them, and so then they're left in limbo without an officer. So if there isn't something like that in place, maybe that's the first question. So if you can answer that, Steve.
Sure, if I could jump in here. Yes, thank you for that question. There is a system in place. The information desk, Sergeant Lipa and his personnel down there, they do keep a register of everybody that calls in, and if there is no response, like if somebody puts in a request for an officer, and if it's for, what is today, Monday, if it's for this weekend, if they don't hear by Wednesday, they'll call back and say, nobody has responded yet to that request for the officer yet. We'll put it out again and try again. And they will put out several of the mass text messages to officers, and then they will respond back to that person saying nobody took the job. So there is, we do have something in place that does say that respond back to them. Now, I'm not going to say it's done every time, but to the best of my knowledge, I do know that they call them back and let them know that somebody did not take that off at that spot.
Every so often, somebody will dial the wrong number, and they'll leave a voice message on somebody's voicemail or whatever. It happened, actually, somebody called the chief's office, called my line, asking for an off-duty officer for a school event. And, you know, I sent it over to Sergeant Null, and we had that posted, and then the tracking system takes place. But if somebody does call and it goes to an employee's voicemail, you know, the employee may be on vacation, they may be on their days off or whatever, but that doesn't happen frequently, to my knowledge.
Right. So do you all have a relationship with Summit County Sheriff's Department? For example, you guys don't have any officers available. Is there a system in place where you guys can call the deputies and say, hey, listen, we've got these jobs available. Maybe one of your guys or gals may want to work it. Do you guys do that? I know we had the issue up with Hillwood and Wilbeth, and now the Summit County deputies are the security, or they patrol that area. So I don't know if that's something that you...
Another great question, and yes, we do. So when we do fall short, we reach out to Summit County Sheriff, and Lieutenant Farrar is very good about that. So when we know that we're short, he will call Summit County Sheriff. They have one deputy over there that oversees all of their extra jobs. So it's easy to call that one person and say, hey, look, there's a request for this. Can you reach out to your deputies? So that's done also. That's a very good question.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Fusco, then Holland.
Thanks, Chairman. No, it's not surprised or shocked, I don't think any of us are, that it's very difficult to get people to work overtime. Mr. Little reminded me about the problems that we have during snow season. I think this is across the board, in every industry across the board. People just don't have that, I don't know what the word is, I don't want to say drive, to work overtime and to make extra money. Add in that, we're in a state where you don't have to learn how to even carry a gun or how to shoot a gun or anything whatsoever. So especially, you know, you compound that with, you know, what our police officers are asked to do in the most difficult of situations, the bars. And, you know, and people are permitted to take guns into bars as well. So our Columbus saw to that a couple years back, recall that, whenever that was passed in the state. But we have much more work to do, and it's the operators control their own destiny, as we all know in here, and it would be good to maybe get some best practices or whatever. I know many of you have worked with those bar owners and say, hey, do this, do that, you know, but maybe some recommendations in terms of, you know, and obviously not today, but think it through in terms, you know, what would be, you know, the ideal situation for the owners. And of course, there may be some liability by us even saying that, you know, recommending that. Of course, Ms. Williams and our attorneys could, you know, think about that as well. But it's a tough situation that you guys are in, and I believe we're doing the best we can, and whatever we can do, obviously. And I appreciate Ms. Mosley bringing this to the fore too. Thank you.
Councilwoman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it really is important that we all appreciate that we are talking about two very different animals, overtime versus off-duty gigs, and that in any event, the era of mandatory overtime is, you know, thankfully gone. That, you know, this really is, this reflects a societal cultural change, that folks really don't want overtime, as the chief alluded to early in his presentation, like they used to. We made a decision collectively as a society that there are things more important than work. You know, I think also, with all due respect to everything that is important to all of us in Akron, it is kind of a no-brainer. The race for case, or the marathon, okay, and working late night at a rowdy bar. I mean, this is a no-brainer. And, you know, there is no requirement, not even an ethical one or a moral one or a, you know, let's all be, you know, be fair and fun about the whole thing to sign up for a round of duty at a bar. It's simply not required, and it doesn't make any sense to think about it any other way. So, you know, really, and to Councilman Fusco's point, truly, at a time when the state absolutely refuses to take any kind of meaningful stand, you know, that will keep any of us safe, you know, after dark, anywhere, you know, I really understand this. And I think that what we have to do is really revisit the idea of shared responsibility for safety, right? Shared responsibility for what happens in our community. So I really appreciate the presentation. I think that, I think certainly our community, you know, needs to understand how we disseminate our safety resources into the community, what they can reasonably expect. But at the same time, you know, it's a two-way street. I'm so grateful for you coming and for the clarity, particularly around how this works.
Yes, ma'am.
Because I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding. So thanks.
Yes, ma'am.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
suggesting it again, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Before I get you out, I do have one question. I don't think you touched on it. Cruiser, when there's an officer that has an extra job or whatever, like for traffic, construction traffic or whatever it might be, is there a fee for the cruiser?
There is. And Steve, do you know what that fee scale is off the top of your head?
I want to say it's $15 an hour for the cruiser. And then if it's like a last-minute one, then we charge them 20.
Okay.
That's for the hour. Like, so if it's a 3-hour minimum job, then it'd be $45 extra for the cruiser.
And that's certainly dependent on the availability of the cars.
So that's like if a cruiser is out there, and I'm sure we've all seen this, like doing the construction, resurfacing the streets or something, and that cruiser is running for the most part, using the lights and obviously the gas, so it's only $15.
An hour, yes. And just to interject, and there also we have I think there's 6 vehicles called the X fleets that are strictly made for the extra jobs. Extra job X, the X fleet. So those cruisers are not frontline cruisers of the old ones that have seen better days, and they're just, our city garage keeps them up well enough to where they're used just for that officer. So he's not looking for a cruiser or taking a frontline cruiser. He's actually going across the street to the Morley deck, grabbing an X fleet cruiser, and going to his assigned job for the day, and then turning it back in.
Okay, that's good to know. Anything else, or, oh, Councilman Malik, I tried.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think you're a little bit to blame because it's sparked from your question. So say there was to be some damage to a cruiser, to an X-Fleet cruiser in an off-duty job, would that fall on us? Would that fall on the entity the officer's contracting with?
That's a good question. I don't have an answer for that,
Okay.
but I will get one. Steve, do you know off the top of your head? I guess it would depend on whose fault it is.
Shamus, you worked in civil, you know it's all fact-driven, so it depends on what happened and how it happened. So
Okay,
there's just
but-
no blanket answer on that one.
Okay, but they're not taking on the liability whole. I understand that, but if there's,
Okay. I would imagine if it was our fault, that, you know, it would be our liability, but if we're at a construction zone and, you know, a piece of machinery falls
Sure.
onto our vehicle, then I would expect the contractor to cover those costs.
all right, I guess, and I totally take your point, Ms. Holmes. I guess I'm suggesting that, you know, maybe there is some room for clarity or definition in that. But anyways, I thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Well, that is a good question, so now I'm going to piggyback off of you. Hopefully, like, when we do move forward with, like, legislation, if it's with resurfacing our streets or sewer construction projects, hopefully that's worded in there. I don't know if, I'm no attorney, but I don't know. I just figured that is a good question, so. All right, with that, I think we're done, so we'll adjourn. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate you coming down, Sergeant. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Again, thank you for all the support that you give the men and women in this police department. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Our final committee of the day will be the Housing and Neighborhood Assistance Committee. That will begin at 3:15. Those committee members are Fusco, Holland, Mosley, McKittrick, and Connor. Again, that's the Housing and Neighborhood Assistance Committee, and it will begin at 3:15. Thank you.